Hi everybody and welcome to the lecture on the inquiry organiser, and this is your first task. So let's get started. So like last year, you have a booklet that you can follow through. There's two parts to this inquiry. Part A is the inquiry process, which is the booklet, and part B is the validation essay, and we'll get to that as well. So obviously this is your title page. Now as we come up, this is where the actual task is here. So I'm just going to go through this one for you. So basically you can see here that it's worth 10%, 5% is research and 5% is validation. Okay, so you get 2 weeks to do this. You've got to use this inquiry organiser. You don't just go, oh, that looks okay, and I'll put that to one side. This one is worth 25 marks, and it's aligned with the SCARSA marking key. So I've written it in mind to basically align up with that, and also some of the source questions will help you understand the sources too for when we go into our source analysis. So you then, once you've finished, I'll assess the booklet, and then you'll have a in-class validation essay, which you can take an essay plan in with you. Okay, so in Year 11, I give you the inquiry question, but basically you've got to develop a proposition, and we'll go through that in a minute. The inquiry question that you're getting is, were the industrialists in the Gilded Age of American history captains of industry or robber barons? And you must be able to define both captains of industry and robber barons, what they both mean in your explanation essay. So you're choosing one industrialist from the list below: John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, William Taft, John Pierpont Morgan, William Randolph Hearst. If you have another one that you would like to choose, show me first. Come in just to make sure you've got enough information on it, and that's fine. We can if there's one that you like. So what you're looking for is, you're just looking for 5 sources. You might find 20, you might find 15, but you just got to pick the 5 sources that you're going to use to support your proposition. So you're going to answer that question really. Were they either captains of industry or robber barons? So that's the position that you're going to take, and we'll go into more of that. So the 5 sources that you need to find include a mixture of both primary and secondary material. Really look for material or sources that shows the impact of your chosen individual. And yesterday we looked at political cartoons, and that's definitely showing a social impact and commentary of these actions of these tycoons. You've got to make sure you reference, there is a mark attached to that, using the APA format, which is the All Saints Standard. Now, your sources can be anything. They include documentaries, a political cartoon, a textbook, biographies, newspaper articles, government documents, speeches, propaganda posters, personal accounts or diaries, what family members might be talking about. I mean, a lot of these families are still in existence today. So, look for a variety. The more sources you can look at, the better in terms of variety. So you want to outline your proposition with supporting evidence from the sources. So complete the booklet, present information from each source, and you're really kind of annotating, which we have a table for. You want to be able to explain the significance of your chosen person, but your essay question for the validation is pretty much, were the industrialists in the Gilded Age of American history captains of industry or robber barons? So that's really that's the big question that you're writing. And then you will actually have an essay that takes a firm stance on whether you think whether they're either, good, or with the captains of industry paving the way, or were they actually corrupt robber barons that really ripped people off. So that's sort of what we're looking at. Okay, so this is the requirements. These are the skills that I linked to in your in your syllabus, and this is also the direct link for marks to your marking key. The marking key is at the end, so we'll go through that, but it's just very quickly looking at the points. The historical knowledge and understanding is this rise of capitalism. So if you're getting a little bit stuck, what you can do is you can basically start to have a look at some of the things here on this sort of section there. These are some of the aspects, so they're really good. Sorry, I'll just move that one there. They're really good to just get you started, especially when you're not too sure, okay, well, where am I going to go? So that's sort of the information that you'd need to get you started. So looking at a few keywords here in the skills, you want significance, absolutely. You want to look at what has continued. So like I said, a lot of these families are still around today. What's changed? So that's short term and long term. We're looking at 5 marks is formulate, test and modify propositions. You don't tend to modify a lot, actually. I'm going to rub that out there. But you definitely will have a proposition or an argument that you'll test. Framing questions to guide inquiry. Identify, locate and organise relevant information, and ethical scholarship is things like making sure that you're not plagiarising, you're not collaborating, and that you're referencing your material properly. There is a section worth 6 marks. That's worth quite a lot, and it's the use of sources. So you're looking at the origin and the purpose of the sources you choose. What were they constructed for? Where did they come from? You've got to analyse, interpret, and then combine all that together to actually create an historical argument. And this is really what the business of the historian is, and the business of you as a history student. This is really what the end point is for your essays, and also for this, is to construct and prove an argument. And basically then you've also got to make sure that are your sources reliable, are they useful, and the contestable nature. And I'll go more into that. The contestable nature of history is really important, and we look at that in sources as well. Then next one down is looking at perspectives. So really just trying to, see the different types of perspectives. You'll get something from the tycoons themselves, but you also want to have a look at maybe some of the workers and the impacts, for the common people and the general public as well. Explanation and communication is really looking at making sure you've got a range of sources there. So that's sort of more looking at that. Validation essay is writing that essay, and I'll go through that explanation for you in a marking key. Okay, so that's just a very quick checklist. Just pop that down there. So this is the first part. You've actually now got to develop a proposition, and that's like a thesis as well. So obviously you've got the key question given to you. Were the industrialists in the Gilded Age of American history considered in captains of industry or robber barons? So you've got to take a position. You can't say, oh, well, they were captains of industry in this way and they were robber barons in the other way. For this first one, I want you to make a decision. Are you going to prove that they were captains of industry, where they were, basically the men who built America, that they, were the ones that laid the foundation for this capitalist nation and paved the way? Or were they actually these robber barons that exploited the situation they found themselves in, were able to build up and dominate the economic situation in America at the time, and did so in a way that really wasn't ethical, in a way that wasn't fair to everybody? And this is a debate that rages today. So we're going to kind of enter into it. So an example of proposition could be that J.D. Rockefeller could be considered a captain of industry who transformed the American economy due to his vision and enterprise. So that's taking the more positive spin on it. So it's really good to use keywords from the question. So you can see here, the industrialist I'm looking at is J.D. Rockefeller, and I've put considered, and then of course popped in my position. And then I've also put here a little bit of a theory. This is why. And you may need to change this. You do this first, but if you need to go back and change it after research, that's quite fine. You can just cross it out on the top there. So this guides it. This is the question you're answering. So if that's the case, you're not going to be looking at the other side of it, though you could still look at it and bring that in. So even though I'm saying take a position, you still have to define both captains of industry and robber barons in your essay. So maybe for some of these key people, you might have to look at including both sides of the argument. But that's something you'll come and see me about. At this point, first off, I'd just like you to take that position in your proposition. Okay, so basically you're proving that. You know that, yes, J.D. Rockefeller was a captain of industry and this is why. Okay, so just that note down there. The proposition may change as your research progresses. This is very normal. You can write the final proposition in your essay validation. And that's really your thesis statement in that is done for you, which is nice. Okay, let's move along. So like last year, you do have research and focus questions, and there's just some examples there. And it's really, again, categorizing them. So if you could just, these all need to be filled out. I want to see that you have defined the main concepts. So these ones here, I'm just coloring them in now. On the right-hand side in the yellow, they are all up on the wall in the back of the class on my sources at the back there. The rest you can easily find by popping that into a search engine. Of course, capitalism is one that we've looked at already, and you're quite happy for you to use the definition that we had in our exercise the other day. Okay, whoops, sorry, I'm just going to bring this out a little bit. I do apologize because we're just popping down here. Okay, so I'm just going to move that screen around because I didn't realise, I forgot we went out a bit. But basically, it's just cut off this bit around here, but that's okay. You'll be able to see on your one that it goes over. All right, so you're looking for research questions first. So your inquiry must be based around questions. It can't really just be heading and dot point. And if you've done this last year, you will understand that. So because that was pretty much the same as last year. It's a key part, you're marked on it, so you have to base it around questions and you've got to generate those questions. Usually it's easier to look at them in terms of how you'll set an essay out, and that's really what I've done for you. So background events and key dates. It could be as simple as writing what are the background events and key dates. That could be biographical detail, you know, that could be looking at some background to help your reader sort of work out a little bit about your tycoon. So that could be the childhood, you know, anything you sort of see as important, you know, where they started out, what part of the country they came from. That would be that sort of thing. Now, the role of one individual for us is very easy because we're looking at one individual. So that could be, you know, what was the role of J.D. Rockefeller in establishing Standard Oil? So, you know, or something like that. I mean, there's a little bit in your, that's probably a bit too specific because you haven't really looked at it yet. But you could say, what was the role of J.D. Rockefeller in the American economy in the Gilded Age? Something like that. That would be fine. Anything that you feel works off the research question is a sub-question. And of course, it's good to show your questioning ability, and I would absolutely urge it. Some questions will basically lend themselves to sub-questions. So if I was looking at background date, key dates and events, I could write down what was the turning point in J.D. Rockefeller's life that inspired him to become an industrialist. And it might be say something in the research sub-questions, which date was this and what led up to this realisation or this action. So you can sort of break your questions up. The research ones are the ones that guide, you know, like your essays, I suppose, and your research. So they're more general, and anything that you can think of that works back off that that's a bit more detailed is a sub-question. So the role of one individual, events that represent changes and continuities. Now, that just means the short-term impacts and long-term impacts. So changes is, well, what happened straight away? So when these guys started to practice, when they started to buy up companies, and when they started to look at industry and the railways and formulate these relationships with others as well, like what did that do straight away? So, you could look at things like short-term impacts of immigration, like, importing labour, but then also you want to look at what's continued, and that could actually potentially be what continues to this day. Or what's continued probably a good 10 or 20 years down the track. For this unit, you've still got lingering effects today because a lot of those companies are still operating, a lot of those families are still making money, and the way that the American government is set up is in some ways quite similar. So that's sort of looking forward. Okay. Now, the significance of the individual is a little bit different to the role. So the role would be looking at that CEO, maybe he's inspiring. It's probably not going to be a huge amount on that one. But the significance is somewhat different because now you're looking at analysis. So what was it? And you've got to rate it. First off, you've got to ask the question, how significant was your individual? How significant was J.D. Rockefeller, in guiding and influencing the economy? How significant was he in the lives of daily people? What are these sort of, is he somewhat significant? Is he really significant? So you're looking at impact really for that one there. Okay, so historiography is basically what the historians say. And it's a bit like the political spectrum. It can be influenced by so many things. Historians have lots of different reasons to take an argument up. They can be influenced by their political beliefs. They can be influenced by just the research they're looking at and their areas of interest and expertise. So the historiography is kind of like this political spectrum, or the spectrum of all the opinions and arguments that historians have. There is never just one. There's quite a few. And in this particular debate, it's categorized as you're either pretty much for them, which means they were fantastic captains of industry, or you were sort of very negative towards them. Which one do you feel is dominant? And that's actually okay as a research question. Quite happy for you guys to take that. So which perspective is dominant in this debate? It might be something like, how many people believe that the captains of industry theory is one that it still holds up today, or which historians hold that the rich industrialists were actually robber barons. So they're the kind of questions that you're asking about that. You want to know which perspective possibly is dominant, and that's quite tricky. Normally you would look in your textbook, because your textbook is the dominant one, but your textbook is actually also bringing up the debate. Okay, so it's sort of looking at, well, hang on, there's two sides to this story, and maybe not either one is dominant. The fact that your textbook has it in there means that it is actually a debate that is in the realms of the historians at the moment, if that makes sense. Okay, that's a bit tricky, that one too. Please come and see me in class if that's not the best explanation and you're still not sure on that one. So contestability. In history, there is really no one true or definite version of events. There's going to be things that are going to challenge each other. Because that's the way that sources work. It's what's left behind, and you're going to find things that have been distorted and manipulated, and also things that might not really work that well, and people have challenged them. So they're usually events, they're usually sources, and what it is, well, how can we challenge this? How could it be challenged, and how has it been challenged? So that could be as simple as looking at, that's the question. How has the rise of JP Morgan been challenged in history? Is there anything that in his story or in the research that could be contested? And there's lots of things where that could happen. That could be as simple as birth dates. Birth dates have been contested a lot, depending on records left behind. If there's not a lot of records behind and people fill in the gaps, others might not agree. So, a lot of historians also think about motives, and you don't really know sometimes, depending, on what was left behind. So there'd be people that it might be challenged. So if you can poke holes in a source, that's really what we call contestability. The other idea as well is that you have two sources that will contradict each other, and that's also contestability. So you might have one source that says that J.D. Rockefeller was the most humanitarian, industrialist and gave away a whole lot of money. And then you might have another source that said he was very mean and stingy and did not give away any money and, pretty much kept profits for his family only. And that's contestability in action there, two sort of opposing sources. So you have to kind of look out for those in this one. Right, let's keep moving along. All right, so I'll move this one along because I can't broaden my field while I'm still taping, unfortunately. So what I might do is actually just pause this and take a break and sort that out. Excuse me for a minute, have a little break. We're back. Okay, this one here is worth quite a few marks, and usually this is where I suppose you can really leverage the marks up. Or this is also where you can absolutely bomb out, I suppose, in inquiry. This is one of the more important aspects of it. We're locating, we're organising, and we're evaluating sources to see if they're any good, to see if they're useful. So what we're going to find here, all of these parts of the table across need to be answered. You don't leave anything up to chance. You fill the whole thing is. There's only 5 you're looking at, your final 5, and then what you're going to do is pop them in there. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to put the name of the source, and that can be, something from your, it's the title on a book or in a website or an article, and you want to know where it came from. So that's who created it, when it was created, and where it came from. So if it's in a website, then you need to absolutely make sure that that's looked at. So I'm going to give you an example now. I'll just go into my Google. I'll use Alpha History because they will often have, let's just pop in there. These guys will often have a let's have a look at the American Revolution. We're in America. This is just an example, guys. It's not for you to worry too much. I don't think this one has a lot. Okay, so this one has some information here, and so you can kind of just cite Alpha History and the website for this one. So it'll be Alpha History, and that's what you would look at there. The origin is from the website. It is, the who is unknown, and basically it's just one of those general articles. Now, if I wanted to go into documents, right, now you'll see here we've got documents, primary documents on the website. So I'll just pull up a random one. Now this one will be different. So if you are going to look at something on a website, just get rid of that ad, then what you'll need to do, if it's a primary source on a website, you'll need to actually kind of look at that. So the origin, or the title would be the Iron Act of 1750. And if you use some of these quote down here, then, you'd look at that. It's still on a website, but basically the petition, the petition against the Iron Act would be what its title is, and its origin would be, British legislation, and who, British politicians, and you'd be basically referencing it that way in that table. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so coming back here, we're looking at locating, organising and evaluating sources, who, when, where, the purpose. So what is the purpose of that source? What we just looked at, it might be the purpose to educate. It could be a purpose to inform. It could be a purpose to provide a law. It could be a purpose to manipulate opinion, and that might be something like propaganda. If it's advertising, its purpose is to sell something. So why is your source constructed? and it's always got a purpose. Even if it's in your textbook, the purpose is to educate. So have a little think about that. Outline the message. So what is the source trying to say? What's the message in basically the text or the picture? So give that one a go there. Now we've got to work out, is it useful? So what are its strengths? Its strengths might be that it has a lot of information and that it basically, can tell you a lot about the period of time or about the person. Its strengths could be that it's written by the person itself, so you're really getting an insight into that person's mind. But then that might have a weakness. So what are its weaknesses? They're neither when you're looking at sources, sometimes they can be really strong, but there'll always be something that they're weak at. So you need to look at both sides. You don't just want to say, oh, it's strong and that's it. That's really not enough. You've got to go, okay, well, if it's strong, what could I pick it apart with? What could it be a weakness? Because that's what you've got to do when you evaluate. You can't say, oh, it's strong, this is why. You've got to say, okay, well, it's strong, however, it might be weak in places. So one of the strengths that we might have, if J.D. Rockefeller has written his own autobiography, is that we're getting his perspective. That's a great strength. We can work out his motivation, but the weakness is also in there as well. Well, the weakness is that it's his story. He can edit it how he likes. He might be remembering it from a long time in the future, so it's not exactly how it happened, and he might choose to omit or leave out facts that actually someone else might put in there. He might make judgments that aren't that correct because, of course, he's biased because he's talking about himself. So that could be a weakness there. And again, look for both. Don't just go it's all strong or all weak. You've got to actually find both of them for this one. Okay, now over here we've got identify and account for the author's perspective in the source. So what you've got to work out is you've got to work out, well, okay, what is the perspective? So again, I'm going to use J.D. Rockefeller as an example. So his perspective is coming from, that is basically his personal perspective about his own life. So we're looking at a personal perspective about that person's own life. So it's deeply intimate. It's something where, you're looking just from that first person point of view almost. But that's really just an identification. If we were looking at something from a government source, then it could be this government perspective to legislate. It does really link quite well to purpose. A perspective could be a persuasive perspective. So it's really that point of view that you're looking at. It could be a bit more distance. So if you're looking at a textbook, for example, then you're identifying maybe a dominant perspective, a mainstream perspective, because that's what you normally see in a textbook. It's a balanced perspective, but it's not without its problems either. Okay, so we want to account for it, which means why do they have that perspective? So with someone, if you're looking at an autobiography by J.D. Rockefeller, well, he's basically how you can account for that is that he's lived through it and he'd like to record it. So you're kind of explaining why, and that's what account for means. So if you had someone writing a biography, so the author's perspective would be on the outside looking in, so it's not the person that's lived it, but basically with the account for, it could be that you find out this author has a particular interest that feels should be shared, or let's say that the author disagrees with the official version, or disagrees with J.D. Rockefeller's version and wants to publish the other side of the story. Well, that's accounting for. That's explaining why. And that's really what you're looking at. And then really you're just popping in the research question that relates to that source. And that could be background, and you just copy and paste that in from the one above. But with those ones, they're actually things that you have to do when you do a source analysis as well. So with those concepts, either replay this if you're not too sure, but otherwise the best thing to do is to go back and look up some of the words and input them into your vocabulary table. Have a look. We also have them on the course outline tab where a lot of your scars of things are. There is a glossary there. Go and look at that first, and then of course come and see me if you're having a problem with that. All right, let's go. That's just some extra bits there. All right, then after that, we're basically taking those 5. Once you've analysed those sources, now we're just collating the information. So you're going to notice, like last year, it's a little bit simpler, but you're taking all the information from your sources and you've got to condense them into summary notes. Your organising principle is your research question, not your heading. So you might have what are the key background events, and there might be 2 sources that tell you that, and you'll put them here. Then you've got to use any quotes and evidence that support, I suppose, your answer to the research question. And keep in mind the big question as well of robber barons and captains of industry. So make your quotes fairly small. Don't grab huge chunks of text here. Find and think of quotes that you would use in an essay. So you don't want to overwhelm. I'm not looking for quantity. I'm looking for quality in terms of the notes answer your research question. They will combine then to form a plan to answer the overall question. It's not a matter of if you produce more, you'll get a higher mark. And that's not the case at all. It's a matter of being concise and clear and linking those sources to your question and actually engaging with the process. Not having 50 pages of notes that really don't kind of engage with that. I'm not looking for like the person who can research the most. I'm looking for the most effective research that can be used to form an argument in an essay. So that's those ones there. You'll need to fill that in for each question. And then that's just a quick reflection checklist just to make sure you're done. And now we go down into the planner. Now, this is the planner that you will take in with you. So you want to I don't want to see an essay in here, okay? You're going to hand that in, and I do not want to see an essay in here. What I want to see is an information organizer. So dot points is what you're looking for. What I want you to do is I want you to follow these side bits here. So this here, the proposition. So I'd like you to write that up the top there. Then you've got to define your key terms. Whoops, I'll go back up, sorry. And I want you to write that next to it as well. Then anything, your background and key events, that's the third thing that goes in there. So I'll just rub that out there. So basically like 1, oops, I've got the rubber there. No, 1, 2, 3. And so here, proposition, key terms, background events, dot point, dot point, dot point. Okay, any key quotes you want to pop in, that's fine. Okay, then each paragraph will have its section there. Now, once you've had a look at background and key events, the next thing is the role of the individual. So that's where you can put here the role of the individual as your point. Now, obviously, we've got a few more research questions. So you're not going to have one research question per paragraph, because that's too many. So you're going to have to work out which ones to combine. So you might talk about the role of the individual, and then you might want to have a look at the short-term causes or changes. Then, this is just a suggestion, you might have another way. That's where you've got to plan it out. After that, depending on your research, for the next paragraph, you might talk about the continuity, so the longer term impacts, and then have a little analysis on the significance. Then basically, you might want to look at the debate, the robber barons versus the captains of industry, and you might want to engage with the contestability of that. So obviously they're 2 opposing perspectives, and you might have some quotes that talk about, how maybe your one could be contested. So you're sort of looking at that to some small degree. And then you've also got here, you might want to have a look at the role and impact overall. So you still got to, it's kind of like a couple of layers on this one. You want to organise your research into the planner. Don't forget, we still need to answer the actual question and weave that into your information into that answer. At the end, your conclusion basically restates that position, whether you're looking at robber barons or captains of industry, and then you might have just a little bit of your sort of the summary of your main points. So once you've done that, at this early stage, because you haven't done one of these before, this is really before you hand this in, I would check this with me just to make sure you're on the right track, because inquiry can be a little bit detailed and a little bit confusing. So just make sure once you've completed your planner, then you're right on track. Now, if you are quite quick at this process and this is your thing, then I would urge you also to do a practice essay that I will give you feedback on. And that way you're positioning yourself for a really good start with your assessments. That's pretty much the end then of that process. And you can either use SiteMaker, which is absolutely the best thing to use to get that nice big mark on your bibliography, or you can use this template here. Just make sure you rub out this stuff. My little eraser. Okay, so let's go down and have a quick look at the marking key. So you've got two. I'm going to pause right there just to adjust my screen, and so if you need to take a break, now is the time. Back in a minute. And we're back. So what we're looking at here is the marking key for the inquiry. I'll just go back. Okay, so you can see here the top marks are over there on each one. I'll just change my pen out there. Okay, so what we're looking at here, you can get between, you can get between 1 and 5 for this. So it's out of 25, and you can get between 1 and 5 marks available. And that's your questions and research. So that's really looking at what kind of sources you're getting, how good your questions are, whether your proposition sort of is a nice cool one, and whether you've absolutely been really ethical in your research. So this is really the act of research, and very easy really, as long as you follow the steps to get the good 5 marks on that. The analysis, which is that table that you've got there for your sources, that's worth 6 marks. So you can really, again, looking at that table is worth 6 marks. So that's a fairly high mark, and it's looking then at how you will pop that one through, making that table, really answering the questions, considering the sources, and looking at that reliability and usefulness, looking at your origin and your purpose and your message. So that's a really important table to be aware of. Okay, that one also ties into, you've got to analyze and account for different perspectives. So that little bit of that can be worth 4 marks. Now, I take a couple of marks, so really that table in the middle is worth about 8 to 12 marks. But the thing is, I also look at whether you've sort of, considered the different perspectives. So that also ties into having a good variety. So if you've just got 5 sources written by J.D. Rockefeller, that's not going to look at the different perspectives of individuals. So what you want to have a look at there in your selection, you might find an account of a factory worker in Henry Ford's factory and their working conditions. That's a different perspective. So you need to have a look at what's going on at the top with these tycoons, but you also want to have a look at what's going on down the bottom, because that's looking at significance, and that's helping your evidence to really get that argument going. If you believe that, Henry Ford was a visionary and a captain of industry because of the way he revolutionized the manufacturing industry with the assembly line, then that's what you're looking at. You would still maybe you get a couple of quotes from people that were happy with the car itself, or you can have a look at things like statistics in economics. Absolutely, you can look at what the productivity was. So that's a different perspective, and then maybe have a look at someone that worked on the factory floor, and if they had an account for that, as well as Henry Ford's kind of directive. So try and get as many perspectives. It's worth 4 marks. So explanation communication is really just making sure that your writing in your notes is nice and clear, that you're using words that are technical and that are related to history. So using those good definitions, and that you are referencing consistently, and that's easily, that's that nice 4 marks there. And here, the last one is, again, this analytical sort of thing, and that's over a few tables. So that's looking at continuity and change, so short-term and long-term impact, and the significance of that as well. So I'll see that in your essay planner. I'll see that in your research questions, and hopefully I'll see sources that can show me that in your tables. So this one here down the bottom goes across all of them. So that's the inquiry marking key. What you want to do with marking keys is really I have to follow these to the T, and I use these to give you feedback as well. I'm really strict with trying to follow it as much as I can. So these are a good way to really understand what's required. This is what you get marked on. You don't get marked on anything extra. It's only there. If you put extra in that's not in these marking keys, I can't give you anything extra. So just sort of keep that in mind as well. So when we get down here, this is for your validation essay. Now this one here is quite handy, and I will do a separate one again, but this is the same from here to year 12. This one doesn't change. The inquiry one for the top process for year 12 is slightly different, but this marking key here, your validation essay, your essay explanation, they are always the same. Okay, so you get 3 marks for a really good introductory paragraph. For that, you need to have a clear sort of understanding of the answer, I suppose, to the question. You've got to provide a focus, so you want definite time periods. You need to actually have a thesis that takes into account the question, and you really need that clear sense of direction. Now, that it does include defining any key terms that you're arguing for. So what you see here is what's called a synthesized narrative. Now, that is the story that runs underneath. So what that kind of thing is, like having a look at understanding that events, people and ideas are linked to those short-term and long-term changes, continuity and change. Okay, and that's, I'll just kind of underline that one there. So basically how it works is these ones up here are the top bands. Just go up. Right, they're the top marks, and everything else is under those. So if you want to aim for that, that's what you're looking at, that top one. And what happens is they all go down from there, basically. So this is your top, this is your excellent. That's exactly what you need to do. And then, like, you know, if you get 3 marks, then that's the skill there next to it. And that's pretty much how it works. The narrative is the story. So it's almost like this happened, this happened, this happened in this order. If you can have a look at and discuss how things are related and bring it together in terms of its short and long-term impact, then you're going to get the higher marks. If you just write me a simple story, okay, and just this is what happened, and I'm not getting a lot of that research thrown in and not seeing understanding, then you'll just get 1. And you've got the other 2 that are somewhat in between. One of the key errors is that people write a narrative, which is this happened, and this happened, and that happened. And absolutely, history is a story, but you'll notice that it's really only worth 4 marks. So yes, you've got to get it in order, and you must have it sort of, you know, flowing through, but it by itself, it's not really going to get you very far. It's only part of the essay that you're constructing. There's 2 sections. They're coming to them now. I'll just kind of clip it down there. Argument and supporting evidence. Everything hinges on these 2. Supporting evidence is worth 9 marks. Argument is worth 6, 15 out of a possible 25. The thing is, they all work together as well. These 2 work together. So if you've got a really clear argument that you are linking back to all the way through your essay, your evidence needs to support that argument or go against something. So taking that sort of, you know, view. If you can manage that, then you're going to get those higher marks. But what tends to happen, unfortunately, where the downfall is that the argument is not strong. It's not stated clearly. So you can have all the evidence in the world, but because it's not being used well to support the argument, then I am very limited, excuse me, as to what I can provide. So you'll see that there. So if you got the top here, if you get a good argument, it's sophisticated, it shows a good depth of analysis, and I can understand it, then you're going to go at the top. If you've got detailed, accurate, relevant evidence that helps this argument, that basically looks at the debate or evaluates that proposition. So that's what we're doing there. That's actually what you're doing, is you're evaluating the proposition. And you've got to use the historical evidence, so I'm just going to highlight that one, to argue for and against this view. That's really what you need to do. The evidence must strengthen and support. Now, if you do that, you can get 7 to 9, okay? What most people tend to do is get around this middle area, because that is a tricky thing to do. If you are naturally good at an argument and arguing the toss and you know how to use your evidence, then you'll do very well. One of the tips that one of my Year 12s who was very successful last year did was basically argued against the proposition. So that's a much easier argument to make. So just think about that when you're constructing an essay plan. And then the rest are pretty much down there. If you're only going to give me a little bit of evidence and it's not accurate, I'm only going to give you 1. You can get away between 5 and 6 with mainly accurate and relevant. You can look at quotes, sources, stats. You have, with an explanation essay, we expect that you've got pretty good evidence because you've got it in front of you in the form of quotes. You're not having to remember it. Whereas when you just do when you get into Year 12 and you're looking at your ways and your exams, even for Year 11 too, you've got to remember those. So make the quotes nice and short and to the point. So in this one, you don't need to worry about that yet because you're doing it with the essay plan next to you. Okay, then this one here, the conclusion, you want to draw the argument or point of view together. You want to or you summarize it, or you just basically have one sentence at the end. What a good conclusion does is restates the proposition, reevaluates all the main points and brings it together with a final sort of, yes, this is my position. And it's always good to have a nice further thought. So that just shows you understand your question or your area really well. And that could be something about, what's happening in the future or what's still happening now. Or you might have sort of a bit of a comment that you'd like to make on the whole situation. So it's really just something to drop in there at the end. We call it a powerful statement that kind of draws everything together, and that can be tricky. And again, it's not something that we're expecting you to be brilliant with out the gate. Be good to yourselves. This is your first time out. I think really understanding the process is the key thing. Looking really carefully for this first one throughout your marking keys, understanding this table very well, and come and see me. Obviously, you're working through the process. I'm right there with you. So, if you're getting stuck and, when it comes time to bring all this information together and you're having trouble, please come and see me and I'll help you out with that. So this lecture is relatively long and I apologise for that, but the inquiry process doesn't change, so you can keep this and look back on it for inquiry for next semester and even into your Year 12 career if you continue on. So I hope that was clear and that and useful for you. Okay, thanks for listening.